We've been in a series called Roar. And the first week we talked about shame, overcoming shame, the roar that overcame shame. Last week we talked about the roar that overcomes discouragement. And not just a surface level discouragement, but the discouragement that keeps us from operating in courage. Keeps us from operating. I love that heart that Fernando says, like, we'll be the one. We're not going to be discouraged by momentary trials, but we're going to believe that God has a call on our life. And that's the kind of courage God wants us to walk in, and that comes from a roar within. Jesus already roared, and our roar comes from within and says that we're going to stand up and we're going to walk courageously. And so this week we're going to tackle the third roar. And I'm going to start out by sharing a scripture out of Psalm 23. It's a popular, familiar scripture. It says, He, Jesus, or God, makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. I never understood that first line. He makes me lie down in green pastures until I woke up one day and realized I was a workaholic. And when I say workaholic, I mean I put my career, my vocation, my ministry above my family and above my own health, my soul health. And there was a lot of reasons for that, but unfortunately you can be a pastor and be a workaholic. I found my identity in what I did. I found my identity in all the accolades and approval that everybody gave me. And for the first, I would say, 10 years of my ministry life, I was absolutely unhealthy in that way. And I was constantly pursuing. It's one of the reasons why I'm not on social media typically. I mean, I do a little bit of Facebook here and there for family, but I don't do social media at this time because social media was one of the engines that, or I should say it was gasoline that poured on that engine of accolades and approval and, ooh, how many likes am I going to get and how many followers do I have and all of this stuff. And unfortunately, it sounds really ugly, but that was my life. Those things really mattered to me in ministry. And God has a way of making us lie down when we don't want to lie down, when we need to lie down, because He wants to bring us to green pastures. And I found myself crash landing in San Diego, and I had all the time in the world because I was no longer in ministry. I had a sales job. And what you have to understand about ministry is that if you let it, ministry can be 24/7. And it was. I was out, when I worked in ministry in Washington, I was out at least 4 evenings a week, every single night, every single week, along with working 40 or 50 hours during the week, and putting my family on the back burner for the sake of ministry, for the sake of all the good that I was doing. And so when I crash landed in San Diego, I got a job with sales, and so sales was 9 to 3, no emails, no calls, no responsibilities after 3 o'clock. And so I didn't know what to do. No evenings out, no meetings to go to, no sermons to prepare, nothing, no people to care for. It was literally me and Heather at our family in our little duplex in Escondido, and I didn't know what to do with myself because I had so much time. So I discovered YouTube. YouTube's amazing. Man, there's a lot of cool things on YouTube. And I used to spend all of my time in margin watching YouTube. When I wasn't hanging out with my family, like I would take my lunch break and I would watch videos on surfing, anything I could find, YouTube. And it wasn't too long until I realized that my soul is not getting any better. Because I'm taking all the margin that I have and just filling it up with more stuff. And so God, He woke me up one day and said, I need you to start going to Dixon Lake, and I need you to start walking. And for almost an entire year, every day at 11 o'clock, I went to Dixon Lake, and it was my salvation. I met Jesus like I've never met Him before, in the loneliness and quietness of Dixon Lake. And it was so boring at first. Oh my gosh. But now, I can't wait to go back. I go there all the time. I went there this week to process and talk to the Lord about my message. Because it became rest for me. And there's something There's something wrong with the speed of our modern civilization that's not conducive to human flourishing. I want to talk to you about the roar that settles the restless spirit. The roar that settles the restless spirit.
Amen.
It's like a speedboat that bounces on the water. See, speed is the enemy of depth. And we are lacking deep people. The problem is that we know how to work hard and play hard, but we've lost the art of being still, of delighting, and of being truly refreshed. Thanks to you two. We live in what is arguably the safest time in all of history for young people to grow up. And you're thinking like, wow, it's not safe out there. In comparison to what life was like hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, this is an extremely safe period of time to live. And yet, suicide rates are all-time high. Anxiety is at an all-time high. Dysfunction amongst young people, amongst people in general, is at an all-time high. The next generation has learned the fine art of eliminating margin and rest by filling every waking hour with screens. I have a rule in my house that we can't play video games in 2 locations. The bathroom, for obvious reasons, and the car. And I say that because Caleb got a little portable Nintendo Switch for Christmas, which I'm debating whether or not that was a good idea. And I said, I don't want you playing it in the bathroom, and I don't want you playing it in the car. And recently, Caleb was like, why can't I play it in the car? And I got to explain to him that being bored is a good thing sometimes. I got to explain to him that sometimes the most beautiful, wonderful, creative things come when you're sitting by yourself in the back seat, staring out the window, and you just get to listen to your thoughts. You get to listen to the music. You get to listen to God speaking to you. Do you ever remember being bored? Remember when we used to grow up, we used to have bored moments? Yeah. Well, that's a lost art of being bored, right? Yeah. Not having anything to do. And so I got to explain to my son that this is a gift that screen is trying to steal from you because you don't know how to go a few moments without something entertaining you. It's a problem. A busy, restless spirit is not a divine quality, it's a demonic one. Never once is God or Jesus described as restless or busy, but Satan is. Job chapter 1, verse 6 and 7 says, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them, and the Lord said to Satan, From where do you come? And Satan answered, From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it, implying he never stops. He never stops. Jesus said in Luke about an evil spirit, in Luke chapter 11, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest, but does not find it. See, God talks a lot about rest. Jesus talks a lot about rest. But the demonic cannot rest. They are restless by nature. The restless spirit of this world seeks to make you its slave. Anybody ever been there?
Yeah.
Anybody ever experienced that spirit?
Yeah.
Restless and busy, I can't stop. Anybody ever wake at night and you just like can't shut it down? Can't shut it down. A restless spirit. So no matter how many days off you take, how many vacations you take, how many naps you take, you can't find rest. Because it's a restless spirit. And I'm here to tell you that that restless spirit is the spirit of the God of this world. He can't rest. And he's determined to do everything in his power to get you in that same place emotionally. You can't rest. Matthew 11, chapter 28 is a familiar passage, but seeing it through this lens, it says, Jesus said, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Okay, so I want to dive in, and we're going to I'm driving to a certain end here, so bear with me. I want to take you on a journey, because rest has to be seen in context to all of Scripture. And if we want to know how the human body was meant to flourish, we should look at the one who created it, right? And so in Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, we see God explaining how we are meant to work. And it says, "So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation." That rested means Sabbath. God rested. And I want you to think about this. So there's 7 days of creation. We all know that. And each day was dedicated towards something specific. And I want you to imagine that one of those 7 days was taken away. It never happened. So let's say the day that God decided to create light. Let's just say that day never happened. What kind of a world would we be living in? A world that doesn't work. That's the important part. Without light, our world doesn't work. Let's imagine that the day that God created all the vegetation, that day never happened. Our world literally would not function. It would be non-existent. Every day is necessary for our humanity. And I want to suggest to you that the seventh day is no different.
That's right.
That seventh day is necessary for the world to function. This is what God was creating. See, God wove rest into the rhythm of life. See, we look at Sabbath and we think, that's the Ten Commandments, that's old law, right? And so, but you need to understand that this is way before Moses, way before the law was ever created. God created a rhythm to life, including rest. The rhythm of rest was a story God was weaving all throughout creation from the beginning, and He used Sabbath to tell this story. So if you don't hear anything else, I want you to hear. I want you to hear this. The Sabbath is a story that God is weaving throughout creation about the rhythm of God and how He's created us to work. The very first day we were on this planet, we spent resting. Think about that. God did all the work in 6 days, and on the sixth day we were created, and He said we're good, and then on the seventh day He said, guess what? Free day. Have you ever got a free day without doing any work? It's like, what? That doesn't really... That's like your kids coming to you and saying that they want to rest before the chores. It's like, no, you do the chores, and then you get the reward, you get to rest. And God said, no. No, rest is not a reward. It's a gift. It's a gift that I've blessed. And you get to choose whether or not you receive it. Because the very first thing that we did on the planet was that we rested. Music without rest is noise, not rhythm.
That's right.
I'm talking to my boy Michael. Imagine Michael on the drums just banging away back there.
Come on.
No! I mean, he creates pockets, doesn't he? Like, he knows how to woo us in, and then Alex along with him with bass. Like, there's a rhythm that has to be. Otherwise, it's just noise instead of beautiful music. Wine tastes better when you let it breathe. Land must rest to be productive. Has to. If you work the land without letting it rest, then pretty soon it won't produce anything. It won't produce. Exodus chapter 16, we see God introducing the rule. It was a rhythm way before it was a rule, but God introduces something profound. Exodus chapter 16, verse 23 says, "Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you'll bake, and boil what you'll boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till morning. So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there was no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the fields. 6 days you'll gather it, and on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." Whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish on the day that God has given you to rest, I promise you won't accomplish it.
Wow.
It won't be there.
Wow. Help me, Lord.
Whatever it is that we think is so important that we can't take a day of rest, I promise you, you won't find it. It's not going to be there. Because that day is designated for something else. God was teaching them dependency through rest. If I'm still, you will still feed me. If I rest, I will be okay, taken care of, blessed. If you don't stop and rest, it's because you don't trust God. As I said, we're going somewhere with this because God is creating a narrative and telling a story through the Sabbath rest. Rest was a sign that pointed to redemption. Deuteronomy chapter 5 is another passage where he talks about the Sabbath rest. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember that the Lord your God brought you out there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. See, slaves don't get days off. In this culture, slaves don't get days off. When they were in Egypt, Pharaoh didn't come and say, "You guys have been working so hard, take Sunday off. In fact, go to church. Man, just take a load off. You guys are awesome." No. They worked 7 days a week, back-breaking labor. And so God delivers them with an outstretched arm, and He brings them into the desert, and He says, "You are no longer slaves. Sabbath is a sign that you are free." See, God, through Sabbath, was building a story that goes all throughout creation. It's a rhythm of life. So let's talk about Jesus. Jesus got in trouble all the time for breaking the Sabbath. He was the master Sabbath breaker. Now you have to understand, in those days, in Jesus' day, the Sabbath, they had 22 chapters of material on rules for the Sabbath. So if you were a little Jewish boy, you read through 22 chapters of material on the do's and don'ts of things that you can and can't do on the Sabbath. So Jesus shows up and He just kind of does whatever He wants to. And so Jesus got in trouble a lot. Mark chapter 2, Jesus and the disciples got in trouble picking grain. And then Mark, in addition to that, says that Jesus heals a man with a withered hand. And Jesus says, "Hey, Sabbath is for redemption, and so I'm going to heal somebody," and the Pharisees flip out. In Mark chapter 5, verse 16 and 17, it says, "And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because He was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered and said something really significant and important. He says, 'My Father's working until now, and I am working.'" Working here, people. This is where you rest and I work. Jesus was saying that the Sabbath was a sign pointing to Him. Jesus says, "I am the Lord of the Sabbath." This story of creation that God is weaving is pointing to me. He was saying that this is a day you rest, but I am working. So on the Day of Atonement, Jesus shows up in Jerusalem, and He has the Lord's Supper in the upper room. And we know that this is where we take communion. We take the bread and we take the cup, and we know that this represents Jesus. But back then, it didn't represent Jesus. It represented something else. And so when you took the bread, it was manna. It represented that God provides. God provides a lamb, and God provided manna. Remember, we read in Exodus where Moses was instructing the people. And he said, this is what Sabbath is all about. Manna falls from heaven, and it's a free gift. But on the seventh, you don't pick manna because there's enough left over. And so Jesus, instead of saying, this is the manna, he says, this is my body broken for you. And he does this on the evening of the Sabbath. See, Sabbath is Friday night to Saturday night. So follow me here. I actually have never seen this. I did a lot of study on this message because I really wanted to understand Sabbath, because I know that it interlinks with Jesus. So you have to understand that Sabbath is from Friday night to Saturday night. I actually experienced this in Jerusalem because they still honor Sabbath. Like if you go to an elevator, they always have somebody manning the elevator because you're not allowed to touch one of the floors, because that's considered work. So the elevators stop on every single floor on Sabbath because they don't want you to have to push one of the buttons. So they still honor the Sabbath. And so, anyway, Sabbath is from Friday and Saturday night. So Jesus is doing the Lord's Supper on Friday night, and he's expressing what's happening. So then they crucify him on the Day of Atonement. On the Sabbath, he goes down into the grave. And he is dead all day Saturday. Are you following me? You know what day Saturday is? It's the Sabbath. So what did everybody do? Nothing. They're not allowed to do anything. So we pick it up in Mark chapter 16. It says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. So this is where Mary ends up in the garden, at the garden tomb, on Sunday. Why? Because she can't go there on Saturday. It's Sabbath. So while everybody's standing on their hands doing absolutely nothing, what is Jesus doing? He's setting us free and conquering hell, death, and the grave. He's going down to the pit of hell and defeating the enemy and setting the captives free. All the while, everybody else is doing absolutely nothing. While he works, we rest. See the story that God is weaving through Sabbath, through rest. So Jesus says, all you who are weary and heavy laden. He doesn't say, take a Sabbath day off. He says, come to me. Why? Because I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. It always was pointing towards me. Colossians says this in chapter 2, verse 15, pointing to the Sabbath. We were dead in our trespasses and the uncircumcised of your flesh. God made alive together with him, having forgiven all of your trespasses, canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Therefore, do not pass judgment to you in question of food or drink, or with regards to festivals of new moons or of Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Paul was saying, listen, all of this stuff, it was going somewhere from the beginning, and it was always about Jesus. See, all that was to show that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. See, I can't fix me, but one is coming can. I have to rest because I can't save me, but I'm trusting someone who can. I realize I'm dependent. Remember, Sabbath is a dependency. I realize I'm dependent because someone sufficient is going to be the ultimate Sabbath and bring ultimate rest. Amen. So we're going to land the plane. It's like, okay, what does all this mean? Do we take a day off? How do we find this rest? I know it's Jesus. Jesus is... How do we... Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9 says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from His. Let us therefore make every effort to enter this rest. Why? Because the God of this world, who carries with Him a restless spirit, is after you. And is constantly seeking to enslave you with that spirit. Restlessness, anxiousness, fearfulness, all of those things that cause us to not be able to rest. Most people, it takes them like 3 or 4 days once they're in vacation to just unwind and get rest. So what is Sabbath rest? I want to hit 2 simple ideas that I want to leave you with. First, this is what it is. Cease from your works as a sign of redemption. Cease from your works as a sign of redemption. Don't rest from your works. Cease from them. When the Bible talks about works, it's talking about a works-based acceptance. Jesus finished it.
Amen.
So you have to constantly choose every day, I am not working to be in good graces with Jesus.
That's right.
This relationship that I have with Him is not works-based. I'm ceasing from that as a sign of redemption. You are slaves, and slaves don't have a day off. Slaves work tirelessly as a sign of redemption. We cease from our works and we allow Jesus to do all of the work. And so part of your Sabbath, part of you finding rest, part of you finding the rest that Jesus was talking about is constantly coming back to that place where we say, I am not going to strive any longer for my acceptance. I am not going to work any longer to be in God's good graces. Cease from that. And we talk about that one a lot. And that's fairly standard. And that's fairly like Christianity 101. But I want to talk to you about this other one that is much more prevalent in our world today. And it's this. Rest from your labor as a sign of sonship. Don't cease from your labor. Listen, Sabbath is not an excuse to be lazy. In fact, the Jewish people, they are such hard workers. I mean, the nation of Israel is thriving, and the stuff that comes out of Israel is incredible because they work really, really hard. We don't cease from our labor. We rest from our labor. And labor I'm talking about is actual work, whether it be in your mind, whether it be actually doing stuff. But the work that we do, the labor, is important, but we have to rest from it as a sign of sonship. I choose to trust the rhythm of my Father. Rest is worship. I will not bow to the restless God of this world, for my citizenship is in heaven, and my Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And so when I choose to stop, and when I choose to not work, it's a sign that I am a son of God and not a son of this world. A son of this world is a slave to this world, and he has to continue to work. Because any day you don't work, you're not productive. But a son of the King, when you don't work, he works. So when you take a day off, you are literally stepping into your son and daughtership of the Most High God, where he says, I'm blessing that day. Listen, you can say that a Sabbath day is Old Testament, just like you can say tithing is Old Testament. And you can say that, well, I don't really need to take a full day because I'm in the New Testament now, so I'm just going to take a half day. Just like you can say, I'm going to only give 5% of tithe instead of 10% tithe because I'm in the New Testament. And I'm here to tell you, you go for it. But if there is a blessing that God put on us putting 10% aside. Now, this is not a message on tithing, it's a message on rest, but the same principle applies. If you want to give God less, you go for it. But I'm telling you that there is a blessing here that God created and wove into creation when He started the planet and said, I'm going to work on 6 and I'm going to rest today. And in that rest, I am literally, put that screen back up, the sonship. I'm literally inviting you in to step into your sonship as a son and daughter of the King.
Yeah.
When you take a day off,
All right.
it's worship.
Amen.
If you choose it to be. Now listen, we don't have requirements of what we need to do or not do on this day. Okay? You don't have to, you don't have to do a bunch of things or not do a bunch of things. The point is the posture of our heart to say, this is worship to the Lord. It's worship because I'm declaring my dependency upon Him. You know how hard it is to not work? To not think?
Amen.
To not do something? To not check your email? To not think about that? To not do this? To actually have a day? How hard is that? It's extremely hard. And to not grab your phone and constantly be busy and constantly preoccupied and just like step away. How hard is that? It's so hard. Why? Because our citizenship, come on somebody,
All right.
our citizenship is not here.
That's right.
So you have to step away from the God of this world, the restlessness of this world, and say, this is not my home. And so on this day, it's worship because I am not bound by anything here. Now, is picking up your phone wrong on the Sabbath? No. Totally not wrong. But I'm not bound to it.
Yeah.
I can set it down.
Yeah.
I don't have to check my email. I don't have to be productive. I don't have to worry. That restless spirit. Ooh, what are people saying about me? Well, what's going on with Facebook? Am I missing out? Whoa.
Yeah.
This is not my home.
That's right. Amen.
As soon as I step back into that, I'm stepping into the God of this world, the spirit of this world that's constantly wooing me into, I have to. Anybody with me?
Yeah.
Anybody relate with that feeling? That's because that's our world. That's where everyone lives. You are not a citizen of this home. You are a citizen of heaven. And so when we stop and we draw a line in the sand and we step back and say, no. One day a week, I'm going to center myself in my sonship and my daughtership of heaven. I don't have to do all that
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
because He's my provider.
Yeah. Come on. Amen.
David, in Psalm 23 that we started with, in verse 1, he says, the Lord is my shepherd.
Yes.
I shall not want. Another translation says, I have everything I need.
Yeah.
On your Sabbath day, you get to step back and say, God, you're my provider. I'm not in need. I'm not anxious. I'm not worried. I'm not worried if I don't work, I'm going to lose that job. I'm going to lose that thing. I have to work with these people. I have to make sure what they're... Well, I don't have to do all that. I trust the Lord. And on this day, I am blessed. My family is blessed because I choose to live as a citizen of heaven. What does it mean to roar in such a way that I don't live restless? Well, it starts with saying I am not works-based. I am stepping into the finished work of Jesus. So every day, 7 days a week, I'm ceasing from that kind of work. And then one day, I'm going to set aside. And I'm going to worship. I'm going to worship by delighting in God's creation.
Thank you, Jesus.
I'm going to worship by being fully present, not preoccupied, looking my loved ones in the eye, going on a walk, thanking Him that I am not a slave, I am a son. I'm allowed to release my burdens and my anxieties to Him and trust. Can you imagine if we did that one day a week and just centered ourselves in the citizenship of heaven and allowed that to carry on all week long? Jesus. Father God,